Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Cultural Engagement Center. We are in the middle of APIDA Heritage Month. My name is Dr. Nina Ha, and I'm the director of the A Center. And I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. Virginia Tech acknowledges that we live and work on the Tudelo and Monacan people's homeland, and we recognize their continued relationships with their lands and waterways. We further acknowledge that legislation and practices like the Morrill Act of 1862 enabled the Commonwealth of Virginia to finance and found Virginia Tech through the forced removal of Native nations from their lands, both locally and in Western territories. We understand that honoring Native peoples without explicit material commitments falls short of our institutional responsibilities. Through sustained, transparent, and meaningful engagement with the Tudelo and Monacan peoples and other Native nations, we commit to changing the trajectory of Virginia Tech's history by increasing Indigenous students, staff, and faculty recruitment and retention, diversifying course offerings, and meeting the growing needs of all Virginia tribes and supporting their sovereignty. We must also recognize that enslaved Black people generated revenue and resources used to establish Virginia Tech and were prohibited from attending until 1953. Through inclusive VT, the institutional and individual commitment to group person that I may serve in the spirit of community, diversity, and excellence, we commit to advancing a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive community. Thank you all for being here. I would really extend a grateful appreciation to Dr. Carola Haas for putting this event together. I'm really excited to start, and I figured Dr. Haas, you can take over now.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm Carola Haas. I am a faculty member in the College of Natural Resources and Environment in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation, and I'm honored to serve as the faculty fellow for the Asian Cultural Engagement Center this year. And so, as part of the my duties, I organized this panel, and this is something that Jim Tokahisa, who's sitting to my left, I'm not sure if you can see him, but he and I had organized a panel as part of our Minorities in Ag, Natural Resources, and Urban Sciences chapter back in 2011 on the same topic. And so we thought it would be really interesting to revisit it at this time and see what has changed, what hasn't changed, what the issues are, and but you know, with the pandemic, well, our vision for it has changed. So we didn't bring back the original speakers except for Jim and me, and we had hoped to get a few more producers around the state, but had been sort of stymied by our change in gubernatorial administration, not wanting any state employees to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues anymore. So it made it harder to reach out through our normal channels. But we're very grateful to have Eric Lynn, who said, I haven't been in the production business for years, but he's very involved in APIDA issues in the state, as well as having run a family agricultural business for many years. So very glad to have him. And then also excited to have, so Eric's Virginia Tech alum, and I'll let everybody introduce themselves, but not in either ag and natural resources. But then we've got two other Virginia Tech alums, Arvin Buddha and Elizabeth Song, who are currently working for USDA and USDI agencies respectively. So, and all presumably respectively also. So I'm very glad to have them back. And then we also have Tom Shah, who's a faculty member in agriculture. And so what I'm hoping that we can do is to sort of go around and have the panelists each introduce themselves briefly, and then I've got a series of questions. And I had a few slides up that were playing in the background to just sort of give a background, but if you didn't see those, I don't know if they were visible to anybody, but basically just wanted to give a framework that often the experiences of Asian Pacific Islander, Desi Americans in both agriculture and natural resources has often been overlooked. And, you know, if we look back historically, there's huge contributions. The United Farm Workers was actually started by a coalition of not just Hispanics, but Filipino farm workers. Larry Leon was a huge motivator for that organization. A lot of early agricultural innovations, just like, so much of agriculture in North America used products and knowledge that that enslaved Africans brought over. There are many Asian innovations to agriculture in America that were often unacknowledged. And just like the historic discrimination against African American farmers, there has been historic intentional exclusion of Asian Americans from agriculture and natural resources. And so finding ways to help us feel less alone, more included, and to support others coming behind us is a big motivator for this. So if anybody's interested in that historical information, I'm glad to send out links afterwards. So please feel free to reach out to me. But I think we can go ahead and start with our panelists on the Zoom screens, if that's okay. And I'll call on folks to introduce themselves, and then we'll go around to the couple that are here. So Arvin's showing up first on my screen. Are you willing to go first and just give a brief self-introduction, Arvin?
Sure thing. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Hey, I'm Arvin Buddha. I'm actually up here in Washington, D.C., graduated from Virginia Tech in 2011 and also 2006, my master's then and my PhD in 2011, College of Natural Resources and Environment over the Geography Department. Currently working for the Forest Service. Actually, last week just started a new temp promotion as the National Equity Data Manager. So I'll be working with trying to report up some of our equity accomplishments throughout the agency up to USDA, Congress, and the administration. But yeah, is that good enough right now? We can go in from there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then Elizabeth, that's up next.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I am working for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Lakewood, Colorado right now, doing conservation planning. I got a Bachelor's of Science in Wildlife Conservation at Virginia Tech and graduated in 2019. And I've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service ever since, mostly doing wildlife field biology and habitat and land management type stuff until now.
Eric,
okay, so thanks first of all, thanks for inviting me to join this panel. My name is Eric Lynn. I live in Richmond, Virginia. I graduated from Virginia Tech in 1991, quite some time ago. I actually was in the Department of Materials Engineering. So I did not study agriculture while I was at Virginia Tech. I kind of came late to agriculture. In 2005, 2006, actually, my father and I started a business where we initially did mail orders of seeds and plants, and then ultimately we converted our business into a wholesale orchid production company. And we operated that for 12 years, and it ended up being the largest wholesale orchid producer in the Mid-Atlantic while when we ended up selling the business in 2008. Today, I'm a business development consultant, commercial real estate investor, and my wife seemed to think that my job is advocating for the APIDA communities at various levels. My kids think that I play fantasy football for a living, apparently. But yeah, very, very interested in this conversation today and hope I can add value to it.
Maybe I should switch seats and I can see everybody here a little bit better.
My name is Kang Xia. I'm a professor in environmental chemistry with the School of Plant Environmental Science. So I have been working at Virginia Tech for almost 10 years, and it's a great place. And I need to say that it's definitely a great place. So I came to the United States from China long time ago. That was 32 years ago. I don't feel it was that long, but it's been 32 years. So before working at Virginia Tech, I was working for Mississippi State Chem Lab and at Mississippi State University. And before that, I was at University of Virginia, University of Georgia, in Athens, and for a few years. And before UGA, I was at Kansas State University for 3 years. So anyways, I have seen several universities, and so sort of have a good feeling about how academic working. And along the way, I have met people that are really nice and really encouraging to me, and they have done a lot of great things in terms of advance my career. But I also have encountered some unpleasant situations as an Asian woman. So here I am. Thank you.
My name is Jim Tokuisa. I'm a faculty member in biochemistry and biological sciences. Came to Virginia Tech in 2005, initially hired in the horticulture department. I've done research in plant biology using biochemical and molecular biology techniques. And so going to horticulture was an eye-opener because it was the first time I was presented with the idea of plant biology for the masses, and the primary intention of folks in horticulture to be able to make the public knowledgeable about plants. And so it was, I quite enjoyed that perspective, having come from sort of the discovery science perspective. But more about that later.
So I want to start out, I've got a series of questions, and I'm hoping that the audience, if you have questions too, so be sure to keep those in mind. And I hope that have plenty of time to open up to audience questions. But I thought I'd sort of start off with something to get the discussion going. And I kind of wanted to take a chronological order so to get folks thinking back to their childhood and thinking about whether you had any childhood exposure to agriculture or natural resources. And if, we can go around in the order that we spoke originally, but feel free if you feel like I really have nothing to say on this, it's okay to pass. So if Arvin's comfortable to start again, the question is whether you had any childhood exposure to either agriculture or natural resources.
Sure. As a child, all the way even into high school, my exposure to agricultural or natural resources really was not there. My parents were very much, their first generation came to this country. My dad's Indian, my mom's Filipino. Both of them were in the medical profession. And there's always been an emphasis to either go into medicine or go into engineering. And I found biology by accident. Being a biology major, I actually went from undeclared to industrial design, and then went back into biology and started taking some field courses, which I'd never been introduced to before. So it wasn't until my junior year that I really got the exposure to this area, to this field. And it's been great ever since. I've really enjoyed and I found my passion. So that's how it all started for me. I remember my parents, do a quick story, but when I started out in this area, I was doing research on gopher tortoises in southern Alabama on the Connecticut National Forest. And they came to visit me. It was a hunting shack out in the middle of nowhere in southern Alabama. And they were coming back up from the beach down on Sandestin, Florida. And they saw the conditions in which I was living and were not happy. They were, my mom was visibly shaken and upset, and my mom was also crying. My dad was very upset. He's like, we need to come to this country for you to live like this. He's like, this is not how it's going to be. It'll get better, I promise. But yeah, so now I've been, just pressing on and working hard, and I'm really happy with what I'm doing. They see where I've taken myself to, and there's no complaints. They're happy as well. But that's my experience as a child. No, not there.
Elizabeth, how about you?
I did not know anybody who did worked in natural resources at all. I didn't even know that there were any types of jobs for a while. And I did grow up in a very rural community, and there was a lot of agriculture. And we had some land, and that's kind of where I fell in love with the outdoors. Just spent all my free time outside, climbing trees, catching salamanders. So that was really my exposures, just because we were in a rural area, and that's what we had to do for fun. So.
Eric, how about you?
Okay. So actually, I was introduced to agriculture at an early age. So my parents immigrated here in the early to mid 60s. And, when my father was born in Fujian province in China, my mom was from Shanghai. And my grandfather, my father's father, was an accountant and farmer in China, right? So my father kind of grew up in a kind of a agrarian type of upbringing, but he actually was an engineer. He was an engineer at the time it was Allied Signal Corporation when we moved to Virginia. It's now Honeywell. He was actually the manager of the R&D department in the Spectra Fiber division. But every morning before he went to work, and every day after he came home from work, he would go out and garden for a couple hours. And I was his, assistant or sometimes labor for all the work that he had to do. And, one of the things is we grew only like Chinese vegetables, right? The things that we could not get anywhere else living in Richmond in the 70s and 80s. Right, so we had our bitter melons, our Napa, our water spinach, all these things that we could not buy anywhere else. Somehow my dad got seeds for them, and it was something that we did. I never thought about having a career or even a business in agriculture. That just didn't seem like it was. Maybe it's because of the negative associations of having to cart water and watering plants and all that kind of stuff. I just felt like that wasn't something I wanted to do. But it had some deep cultural connectivity for me because I grew up in a time where I didn't really embrace my Asian identity, but here we were growing these Asian vegetables. I ended up kind of following my dad into engineering, and I ended up deciding that I did not want to work in engineering. Could have saved myself 4 years of headaches in higher applied math and everything. But when I came out, I ended up getting a job at an import company. And a few years later, my father and I decided to go into business, and we purchased that mail order catalog that sold seeds and vegetable and plants. So that's kind of how that progressed for me. It was a very interesting time because I don't consider myself very gifted in terms of agriculture or botany, but that's something that I ended up doing for a living for a little while there. So, but it had deeper roots.
So I guess I'm quite older here in this group, and so my experience, my parents were professors in a very famous university in China. And then during the Cultural Revolution, they were intellectuals. So they got sent to a very remote mountainous area, far, far away from Beijing. So from age 4 to 12, I spent my life there. My parents were miserable, but I had a great time because I did not have much of education. And all I did every day was running around, exploring the nature. And it's a beautiful area in the deep mountains. So you look around, it's just really beautiful scenery. So that's my early exposure to the natural environment. So when I was 12, the Cultural Revolution ended. So my parents then moved back to the university. So we moved back to Beijing, a big city. That was a big shock to me, moving from this mountainous place into the big city. So it took me several years to actually adjust the life and living in the big city. And I deeply missed that environment I was used to. But anyway, that early exposure really made me appreciate pristine environment. And then end of Cultural Revolution in China, the economy started to build up, and actually see the environment start to degrade, right, throughout time. So that's when I decided that I want to get into environmental science for college. And most of the time, environmental science is within the ag college. So here I am doing work on protecting environment. And one part of my work is to look at agriculture impact on the environmental quality, water quality, and soil quality. So that's my path.
So my path was, or my childhood was, I was very introverted and grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. And, there weren't many other Asians around. And so, and our family tended to be sort of introverted anyway. And so I found a lot of solace and enjoyment just hanging around the backyard in the suburbs, and developed a passion for biology, which carried through into college, where I majored in botany. And my guess is if my dad had chosen a second vocation, it would have been to be a nurseryman. In his case, he ended up going to getting a master's in business and being a statistician for Sears Roebuck, which was in Chicago. But he really enjoyed growing plants, and so that's where that sort of rubbed off on me and carried me through college.
So it's fascinating to hear the varied backgrounds that people have. And I want to stay a little bit longer in childhood and ask folks about what exposure to Asian American history folks have had. You know, a lot of people talked about sort of, either a parental disapproval of, thinking that work in agriculture was not, might be a fine avocation, but it wasn't something you could make a job at. But I'm wondering how much cultural influence you had. I know some people probably grew up more isolated and some more tied into the Asian American. So Arvin, if you want to talk about that again.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that too well on that last question.
Childhood exposure to Asian American history. Did you?
Yeah, sure. No, yeah, I didn't have much exposure. I mean, so I grew up in born in New York, but moved to Alabama, and I was really young when I moved to Alabama. So it was Montgomery, Alabama, the capital of the state. There are a few Indian communities, very few Indian communities, very few Filipino communities there. And of course, for me being mixed heritage there, it was also hard for me to kind of, I feel a sense of place, I guess, for me, culturally, because I didn't know where I fit in. On top of that, you have, you've got black and white folks in the area too, and just like trying to fit in there. So it was always a kind of a cultural, trying to think of the words to say here. It felt very odd for me trying to figure out where I fit in. And in terms of, learning more about Asian American history, a lot of that really didn't come with a sense of it until I was living in Portland, Oregon. I had gotten more involved with our employee resource group in the agency, getting to go to a lot of some of the museums there that were talking about some of the experiences of people moving to the Oregon area, Japanese, some Chinese, and then also some Indian history there, getting to learn more about that in the Forest Service, also getting to learn more about that through the city of Portland, the old Chinatown that's there as well. And so the Asian Pacific American Employees Association, which I've chaired in our agency, was very helpful for me trying to get around and also to learn from other employees about Asian American history. So that's where a lot of my exposure came a little bit later in life for me.
So yeah, so not even in college or graduate school, but after you were out.
Well, yeah, in graduate school for me, it was like trying to get through graduate school and finish, and then also for me though, being in graduate school, even just in undergrad too, was looking around and not seeing any familiar faces that look like me. It was very much majority white, and every once in a while you might run into people of other representation, but it was rare, very rare for me. Yeah.
Elizabeth, how about you?
Yeah, I grew up in very rural Southwest Virginia. My family was the only Asian Americans in our whole school. So there was definitely no exposure in public school until college. But I would, listen to the stories that my dad would share and my grandparents would share, and then my aunts and uncles when we would see them. So that most of my knowledge of history came from just their personal accounts until I got to college. And I really, I'm also mixed, and that half of my Chinese half was always kind of neglected. I really didn't know too much of the culture. I didn't know, the stories and the traditions and the history, and I really wanted to. So going to Virginia Tech, I really tried to, make friends, go to the cultural events, and I even took a class in Asian history, culture, and religion, which was really cool, and really kind of, I don't know, as you're saying, like when you're mixed, sometimes you don't really know how you fit and you don't really feel connected, especially as someone who can't speak Chinese. I can't speak the language. So knowing things and participating in holidays and eating the food is really my main connection, and it's very important to me. So really wasn't until college, basically.
Yeah, so I was born in Ohio and moved to Richmond, Virginia when I was like 5, right? So and the Chinese community here was very, very small. Both my parents were from mainland China, but they went to school in Taiwan, right? So the community here was mainly Taiwanese. And there was maybe, I don't want to say 12, 15 families here at the time. And we kind of all banded together, but I actually kind of struggled against my Asian identity when I was a youth. I remember telling my mom that I'm American, right? I don't need to learn Chinese. I don't need to eat these weird vegetables that you guys are making me grow. I actually fought against it, right? And I remember preferring to eat hamburgers and mashed potatoes and corn versus all these wonderful foods that I enjoy now. And ironically, when I went to Virginia Tech, in my discipline, we had like 21 people in my class in my discipline, and only 3 of them are Asians, including myself, and I avoided them. And I actually tended to be with other people. Where I grew up, in the neighborhood I grew up was very multicultural. I lived across from an Indian family, down the street from a German family, African Americans. It was also very religiously diverse. So we kind of had, just everybody kind of belonged, right? So when I was at Tech, I just kind of hung around all these other people and not necessarily the Asian folks. I avoided the Chinese Student Union or the Asian Student Union groups. And it wasn't until I left college and started working in an import company, which was owned by a Chinese couple, right? And at that point, I was basically immersed in the culture. At the time, they were like, oh, okay, July 4th, we don't celebrate July 4th. We're going to work, right? So it was like, in Chinese New Year, they basically took 2 weeks off, so I got immersed in this culture that I had fought against for so many years. And ironically, now it's like, I'm like, I have children who I'm trying to encourage them to embrace the culture that, they share with my wife and I. My wife is Vietnamese and I'm Chinese. So it's very interesting, in terms of, Asian history. Public schools did not teach that, right? If they were, there were footnotes, right? 1882 Exclusion Acts, Wong Kim Ark, that was stuff that we never even talked about, right? Never even heard about. And I found out about that much later when I started becoming more of an advocate for Asian community issues. So, yeah.
Well, since I grew up in China, and so when I came to the States, first just making through graduate school was my priority. I didn't even think about anything, the history, whatever. So it's only when I start having my own kids, and all of a sudden I realized I need to tell them about China. I need to tell them about where I'm from. I need to tell them about, the culture, right, that I grew up with. And so that's when I start really paying attention to the Asian history in the United States and, where the relationship with the bigger society is. And then when my kids, Eric, you're so right. In school, Asian history is just a blur. Even world history, and it's so European centric. And so it's just terrible. And so anyways, and that made me feel even stronger that I need to really tell my kids the balanced information rather than select information. So my kids, they're very in tune with different culture, and they're very open-minded, and they're very proud about their Chinese heritage. So that's my experience.
Thank you, Jim.
So my childhood was this odd clash because my dad's family came from Little Tokyo in Los Angeles, and so there was this Japanese American community. He grew up speaking Japanese. Grandmother never learned English, and on my mom's side, the family actually grew up in Flint, Michigan, and they were really one of two Asian families in that part of Flint, Michigan. And so we ended up growing up in the suburbs of Chicago, but visiting relatives who were living in Chicago in the Japanese American community there. And that was sort of the diaspora after being released from the internment camps that my dad and his family had lived in at Heart Mountain, Wyoming. And so they came to Chicago, and a whole bunch of them formerly from Los Angeles moved there. And so on the weekend, I would have this sort of Japanese American experience. And then the rest of the week, I would be up in the suburbs of Chicago, one of very few Asian families out there. And so the Asian culture was there. It was just sort of separate and on the weekends. In high school, in AP US history, they mentioned transcontinental railway being built in large part with Chinese immigrants. They mentioned the internment camps during World War II, the exclusion acts, and that was about it. It was only in college, and also my dad and mom had books on the internment camps, and so I read those, and that was my learning experience. And then as a graduate student, I actually got involved with the redress movement back in the early 80s, where Ronald Reagan eventually gave money to the descendants or the families of those who were in the internment camps. And Holly Yasui and myself, she passed away last year actually. She's the daughter of one of the lawyers who actually brought cases challenging the internment. And so it was a slow, like everyone else, it was sort of a slow awakening, realization of who we are, and what our place in history is.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I imagine that those are similar experiences that people who are just still in school in Virginia are experiencing with very little exposure to history. So I wanted to sort of bring us into the present with a reflection back just a few years, but in this current environment with the really rapid intensification, this rise of anti-Asian hate. And if Jim wants to reflect back on the previous panel too, could think about that, but to try to think about whether your experiences in the workforce And I know Elizabeth has been in the workforce only a couple of years, and most of it under COVID, but you could, think about your school environment too. But whether climate has really changed over the last 10 years. And also if your workplace is addressing racism in a way that includes anti-Asian issues, because in so many places racial issues are just a black-white dichotomy. So I know that Arvin's been really involved in an employee group, so interested to hear how you all have dealt with those issues the last few years.
Sure thing. So yeah, for the last 2 years especially, but prior to the years before that, we've had actually the Asian Pacific American Employees Association Employee Resource Group for the Forest Service. It's been around since 1993. Put the link to the webpage that we have in the chat, as well as our Facebook group. Please join if y'all are interested, and check out the posts that we've got and contribute what you can. We have a lot of different posts about the history of Asian Americans in the U.S., and not just related to the Forest Service, but in terms of dealing with the stuff that's been happening over the last 2 years. We worked with our executive committee and memberships in the agency, and then also worked with civil rights, the diversity, equity, and inclusion branch that we have. And we were able to put together during the month of May and even prior to May, a whole bunch of webinars actually addressing microaggressions in the workplace, microaggressions if you're out in the public, how do you deal with those kind of issues? We had if you've heard the Stop API Hate group that's out in, I think in LA or in California. We had the executive director do a webinar and talk about what was going on current during that time with attacks on Asian Americans. We had a lot of variety of things going on during that year. I think we had 10 last year webinars during AANHPI month, and we had a lot of good feedback from people. A lot of our employees who are of Asian American heritage were concerned. So we tried to do what we can to help address those fears, trying to move up and onward and provide a positive atmosphere so that people could hear and learn and get more engaged in the workplace, but also hopefully outside of the workplace as well. So that's my experience with being the chair. Actually, last year when this was all going on, I was the chair, but I've also served on the executive committee for the last two terms, it's been a total of 6 years. It's been a great experience for me, getting to meet a lot of people across the country who are Asian American, and getting to learn more about what they do in the agency, but then also getting to learn more about how they grew up. What was their experience like? What was their history like of growing up in the United States? It's been terrific. So, but yes, that's the last 2 years is what it's been like for us in our agency.
I'm sorry, am I supposed to speak now? I can't hear.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I'm having some trouble with the mic. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Like you said, I've only been working like 2.5 years now, so my perspective is very short as far as workplace. In Fish and Wildlife, it could definitely be a lot better. Most of the stuff I see is the required annual online training that doesn't address anything meaningful. So that's pretty disappointing. But recently with the Black Lives Matter protests and the killing of George Floyd, there has been an increase in talks about racism, but like Dr. Haas said, again, it's very Black versus white focused, and I'm glad that those talks are happening. I think that they need to happen. I do think the Asian American community is pretty invisible as far as the things that we deal with and face. I'm hoping that will continue to change, and that as we have more people who are in that community working for the Fish and Wildlife Service, that people like me can be speaking up and raising that voice so people understand that, things can be difficult for us and we can deal with racism, we can face things. And there's a lot of barriers to us even getting into this career in the first place. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Okay, so I kind of like when I was involved in the orchid business, a lot of the people that I were competitors or colleagues in the business were actually Asian or South American, because that's where a lot of the sourcing came from for the plants. So I didn't really feel that there was a whole lot of discrimination or bias against myself or the folks, coming from the folks that I dealt with, right? But I guess I look at the discrimination and anti-Asian bias a little bit more carefully now from the larger perspective. I think, there's always been discrimination against Asians, for quite some time, right? I remember when I was a little kid getting picked on the bus and, my mom going out there and arguing with the bus driver about why she was letting that happen and all that kind of stuff. And even when I was a young adult and into adulthood. But where I've seen a lot of it and I've been really engaged in more recently was where, a lot of Chinese researchers and scientists have been questioned in terms of loyalty based on the geopolitical issues between China and the United States. Even to the recent China initiative that was in place and recently was, I guess, discontinued in its current form, right? I just think that there's going to be these systemic biases and issues in place for quite some time, just because of the way geopolitics are working at this point, and we have to look at some of the underlying systemic causes and policies that create these situations. In working on addressing the China initiative, we met with folks from the NIH and National Science Foundation in terms of the grants that they provide for researchers and scientists, and it affects the folks at Virginia Tech. It's going to be a long battle for some of those things as we address these systemic issues. And the problem is, we have to understand how it impacts us and how, we can be part of the problem by not recognizing our role in these fights. And at the same time, to Elizabeth's point, we're a growing segment of the minority population, so we actually have to kind of band with other communities that are, these disparate communities that are disenfranchised or marginalized by becoming allies. So it's something where we have to recognize that, what does impact another community could also impact ours. So yeah, it's kind of a more of a larger view as opposed to something more specific to ag or natural resources. But I spend a lot of my time these days, working on these kind of issues at the state level and the national level. So yeah, I think that's probably what I want to offer there.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. The China initiative has directly impacted employees at Virginia Tech, and it's really destructive.
Yep.
These things, terror is probably the point, right? And so that's how so much of the discrimination and hatred keeps going. So yeah, thanks for
that. Like I said, that I have lived in the United States for 32 years. My biggest frustration is that I feel like I'm constantly being put in a box. And the form of the box is created by a lack of education of Asian culture. And also the image that are created by popular culture. So I am a loud person and I voice my opinion. And very often I notice my colleagues were in shock because I'm not in this box, right? That Asian woman is supposed to be sort of quiet and kind of neat, right? And that's the stereotype. And so early on in my career, I even had people made a comment to me, "You're so not Chinese-like." And my question to them is, tell me what Chinese should look like. So that's outright aggression. And then along the way, there are a lot of tiny, small microaggression, that's what you say, but just as annoying and serious. So for me, that I feel that if I get a chance, I would raise my voice and talk about the issues. I think it's up to us to address the issue of discrimination. And Eric is totally right. We should not work alone. We should work with other groups and to address the issue of discrimination. So yeah, I have a lot of individual examples, but I don't need to share. But I think the biggest thing is this box is drawn by many people that don't really understand Asian culture.
So I guess being the along with the only other people who were at the original workshop, the take home that I had from that was just that there were so many different experiences and very different ones, but they were very formative in who they became. Black Lives Matter, reassessing my own experience. Okay, yeah, now we've got voice. Yeah. And so, and what I realized was actually that I have also grown up intentionally of trying to avoid confrontations with anti-Asian elements and things that have just become what I would consider to be a natural part of myself. I tend to do things early in the day to avoid the crowds, and I've always rationalized that I just want to get things done quickly and move on to other things. And I realized how much of that has been actually shaped by these subliminal messages that I've been getting living in American society. And for me, that has been a really eye-opener, particularly this last year and 2 years. But yeah, the main point with that original workshop was just the diversity of Asian experiences in the United States. It's just absolutely amazing. Wonderful stories to hear, and on the positive side, there's positive elements to that shaping. And I still remember fondly those presentations.
Thank you. So I see there are somebody still standing in the back. If you'd like to move up, there are seats. There are seats still up here, so feel free. Sorry, we have no food for the Zoom people, but there is still food up here for the people in person. So yeah, I'd like to. I don't want to go too long, but I want to open things up to questions. But I do have a couple of more questions. For those of you who have, I understand in different work environments, some of you don't work closely with the APIDA communities, but those of you who do, or even reflecting with your own family or your outside work community, I'm curious if you've had to address issues of discrimination within or among APIDA populations, or anti-Black racism, or similar concerns. And again, Elizabeth raised the Black Lives Matter protests, and for those of us, people my age, if your parents are still alive, they're probably in their 80s, and so with the murders of some of these elderly Asian Americans, many of us have been very, concerned about our parents' safety. And, after the Atlanta shootings, there was a lot of chatter among my friends of, I'm gonna get, should I get my mom a gun or a taser, or trying to talk to parents about how, if they saw this, they were gonna call police, and trying to navigate those issues of, in this moment, calling the police is probably not the thing to do, and trying to navigate those discussions with our elderly parents. Again, many of whom are immigrants and, are having, subject to the same sort of biased news media. So I know there's a lot been going on for all of us trying to navigate these issues. And so again, kind of come back to that. My question is, have you had to address issues either of discrimination within APIDA populations? We have plenty of colorism or, assumptions about, good Asians or bad Asians, or that, and as well as anti-Black racism. So I'm curious if you tend to address that at all. And I'll start again with Arthur.
I'm trying to think about what you were talking about there and reflect upon it, and talk more about what's going on there. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the community, I mean, I'm not really engaged here where I live in DC with a lot of the Asian community, but I do, as you were talking about, Carla, with like for my parents, concerned especially with my mom being in Montgomery, that something could happen to her. She's in her mid 70s. My dad too, and they've been concerned with me in the past, even prior to what's been happening, even in Atlanta, with a lot of the different incidents that have been going on in New York and around the country. Prior to that, with with 9/11, I mean, I don't fit the script as I guess you can say, an East Asian or a Filipino. Many people don't even see that. Usually, people see me as they don't know where I'm from. But when I have a beard and I do walk around with a beard, I have had my parents concerned for my safety because they're, especially after 9/11, were concerned about me looking like a terrorist or being thought that I was a terrorist. And I've had those assumptions thrown at me before, where people came at me in a pretty not so great manner, but then I had to figure out how to diffuse the situation, and then try to be empathic with them. Very tough to do. But yeah, I mean, kind of scrambled here, kind of be random thoughts on stuff. But I mean, we've tried to deal with a lot of stuff. I'm thinking about now in our agency, in our professional work environment. We do have other employee resource groups. We do have an African American strategy group. We have a group that's called the Giver Group, and they're LGBTQIA plus group, Hispanic group. And we've been trying to figure out how do we get more engaged with each other, seek allyship, work within the agency to enhance diversity and equity and inclusion. There are a number of executive orders that have come out under the current administration, Biden's administration. There's also other acts that are out there where we're trying to help increase diversity and equity in our agency, because we've had some issues already. I think there's a publication that came out recently, try to find the link for it, about how the agency has seen a decrease in diversity over time, and we don't have the retention of people that we need to be having in this agency. So we've been losing a lot of that. And how do we bring that back into here? How do we get people to want to stay? So the big concern for the agency, big concern for a lot of the folks who are in these different employee resource groups, because the more diverse faces you see across these spaces in our national forest systems, hopefully the more people of color want to be engaged in those public lands and use them. I have to think some more about some. It's a lot of things ruminating in my head, so my apologies. I'm going to go ahead and pass to Elizabeth.
I honestly don't have too much to add to this question. I haven't really worked with many Asian, Pacific Islander, Desi communities. I've usually been the only person who would fit in that community wherever I've lived and worked. So mostly I've dealt with like discrimination against minorities as a group, and that type of stuff, but not that specific. So I'll go ahead and pass it.
So I guess I'll kind of talk about two things. So the first, we're talking about people like my parents and their safety with all the anti-Asian hate. And I look at that from two perspectives. Of course, we have to take care of our communities ourselves. on that front, there was during this whole rise of anti-Asian hate and bias, there was this concerted effort to kind of educate ourselves about how to take care of ourselves, whether it's personal safety, situational awareness, all those things. And I remember, my parents they still live in Richmond with me. And, I would like go shopping for them, right? But I would find myself apprehensive walking through grocery stores and whatnot, right? There's another thing about not only protecting ourselves or not putting ourselves in situations, but also when you are confronted with situations, it was very difficult for our communities to report incidents of bias and hate. Arvin mentioned earlier about Stop AAPI Hate, that website that was created by, I think it's UCSF professor. 6 organizations, national organizations, pooled these reporting, and I think to date, since March of 2020, there's been like 11,000 incidents of hate and bias that have been reported, but we know that's severely underreported, right? So, we need that information. We need our communities to let people know when these things happen, and when it does happen, because we know it's still happening. Happened in New York recently, and I know it's happening in places that people are saying, oh, what's the point of reporting it? They're not going to do anything, or this is just what happens. The second part of that conversation is there's responsibility of public resources, public service providers to address it, right? We need to look at how hate crimes are treated in the states that we're in, right? How localities are training their police and law enforcement to address hate crimes and investigate. I am here in Central Virginia, and just over the weekend, the West End Islamic Center was broken into and vandalized, right? But our local police department just chalked it up to teenagers getting into trouble, right? There has been no investigation. There was, so there is a responsibility of our public safety, law enforcement to address these hate crimes and biases. And we need to make sure there's laws on the books that will provide stiffer penalties and provide better guidance on how these things are going to be investigated and prosecuted. The other thing you mentioned, Carol, was good Asian, bad Asian, right? And I think the anti-Asian hate is built on the back of the bad Asian concept, right? The perpetual foreigner or the other, right? And that is something that's convenient when they want to use it for political points, these economic conversations and whatnot. But that's, I guess, balanced with the model minority myth, right? Where they hold us up as this high-performing minority group that is in some ways very divisive when we talk about our allyships with other minorities. We kind of exist in a duality for both of those. And again, we have to recognize how those are being used against us and against others, and find ways to kind of push back and kind of push the narrative that we are not monolithic, and we don't prescribe to either one of those. We have a lot of facets to our communities, and our issues are not all the same. We have, yes, highly educated, very well off APIDAs, but we also have those who struggle with poverty. So it's a danger where they just kind of lump us as Asian Americans and kind of assume that that's enough to address our issues and opportunities. But I think as we grow into our roles in our lives, we have to figure out how we're going to address that conversation. So yeah, just kind of throw a whole bunch of stuff there.
Well, to me, I think to address the discrimination issue to our Asian community, we need to form allies with other minorities, which work together to address the discrimination issue. So then it become not just discriminating against Asian, against African American, it's discrimination against minorities. So we should have stronger voice in that sense. So now, as a first generation immigrant, and I sometimes do see that we say, okay, we're being discriminated against, but I also see us discriminating against other minority. And a lot of times it's because we don't understand where they're from and what their background is. So I think having a better dialogue so that we all can work together to address the issue of discrimination. If not, in my opinion, it's more effective than individual group work individually against this, to address the issue.
Yes, I agree. Endorse this notion of allyship. It was a lesson that was learned to me when I was in college, graduate school, and the Asian American group was dominated by folks of East Asian ancestry, and especially people from Hawaii. For some reason, they decided to go to University of Wisconsin, and so there was a large contingency there. While we were there, and that was sort of the dominant leadership in the group, there was a lot of South Asian folks were moving into the Midwest at that particular time, and so they began to join the group and assumed also leadership positions there. And so there was a little bit of a conflict. But at that point, that was when I realized that this allyship was really important. We were all going through the same kind of experiences, and that we needed to work together. And it was only by working together that we were going to be able to survive and prosper. And so ever since then, I've been a firm believer in trying to find allies wherever we go. And in my mind, the challenge is that the dominant culture is always trying to create this infighting amongst what should be natural allies. And that's something that we really have to fight against.
So I've got one more question, but I think what I'd like to do is open it up for questions for the audience, and then we can come back at the end if there's time, because I would like to hear from everybody what you think is important for current students, current APIDA students, to know or to do in order to be able to succeed in your discipline, either as a student or a professional. So I would like you all to reflect on that, and then we'll see if there's other questions from the audience first or on the chat, and then come back to that. Questions in person?
Thank you so much for your wonderful experiences and sharing them with us. I have a question here. There is a bias and discrimination we were talking about. Somewhere there is a bias from everyone, all of us as well, because we are from different culture. And then there is this notion around that, oh, there is bias, there is racism, there is discrimination. Even if it's not there, we think that it's there. And I think this can be a problem. So many a times it's like, probably it was wasn't any discrimination. And it's just a perception. So sometimes it's perception, sometimes it's real. And it makes me confused sometimes what's happening. And maybe sometimes it can make me think, oh, should we stay away from people of different cultures, or a bit more careful? Like, I just wanted to open up this question with you. You are very experienced. So what advice or what are your views on this to all the grad students? And if yeah, something on that line, if that makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Does anyone feel like tackling that question? have an initial response I should share, and that's, of course, you're right. You know, sometimes we perceive things that weren't meant in a discriminatory way, but the intention still has that negative effect. So I think it is a microaggression, and I think you don't have to, people want you to second guess yourself, and they want to do hurtful things and then deny that they did anything hurtful. And sometimes it truly is unconscious on their part, right? But, you know, the person who said that Dr. Xia didn't act like a normal Chinese, they probably thought that was an okay thing to say, right? They weren't trying to attack her, but it's a horrible thing to say, right? So I think, you know, I would say that if you feel like it's a microaggression, it is a microaggression. And, you know, you don't always have the ability to respond to it. But if you are going to continue to interact with those people, if you can, I think it's good to let them know the impact that it had on you, so they don't do that again to you or to other people. So I think you shouldn't have to second guess yourself. If it feels like discrimination, it really is. Others have anything to
I'd be willing to add something.
okay.
So, you know, at least, you know, what I'm hearing from you is, you know, sometimes it's really difficult to tell the intention behind what someone said. And I've definitely got a lot of kind of those offhand comments that people say where you're like, maybe they just said that because they genuinely think it's funny and they don't know that it's harmful or it's kind of upsetting. Or maybe they're just seeing how people react if they say these harmful comments, if they can get away with it and escalate. So it is difficult to know, I think, if what someone's intention is. And the way I've mostly dealt with that is to kind of ask questions to them, like not just say nothing, but kind of ask a question like, oh, what made you say that, or what makes you think that's true, or where did you get that idea from? And then, you know, kind of giving the benefit of the doubt to some extent of like, hey, I'm sure you meant that as a joke. From my perspective, that's not really funny because of this, or I'm sure you didn't mean it in this way. You know, this could be taken offensive to some people. Maybe that's not the best word. That's usually what has worked for me. However, you know, to be honest, there's also been times where people have said stuff and it's so like off-putting and confusing that I don't even know how to react. And it's like, in retrospect, I think, oh, I wish I would have said something about that. Maybe they were, you know, trying to be racist. Maybe they're trying to, you know, be intentionally harmful. It's really easy to second guess yourself and not feel like you're overreacting. But I think as long as you're not immediately coming out with a very hostile approach in those times when you're not sure, you know, I think if they're genuinely not trying to be harmful, they're going to respond. They're going to have a dialogue with you. They're going to want to hear if they're not feeling attacked. And then you can kind of gauge, you know, what was their real intention, because if they are intentionally trying to harm you, that is someone that you probably want to avoid and not interact with as much as you can. Or, you know, if you have anything like that is solid enough to report, you could go that route too. But I generally just try to be curious and ask questions and get them to think about what they said.
Yeah, I want to respond to your question. And I believe a lot of times the people that are making a microaggression, they didn't even realize what they have done, what harm they have done to other people. Now, microaggression can add to bigger aggression. So to me, if you, in that situation, you don't feel comfortable about this person's comments, it doesn't matter that person's intent, what the intention is, right? You need to address it. But you don't have to, you know, like Elizabeth said, you don't have to be like really just punch the person back, right? It doesn't have to be in a very aggressive way, but you do need to ask a question. So address the issue so that person would not do the same thing to the next person. I think this addressing the issue is in a way, you know, a communication. and also educate the person, right? So that we all can move forward. So to me, microaggression is a big issue. And I tell my kids, if in the situation you're not feeling comfortable, there got to be some reason, right? So that need to be resolved so that you don't have to get into the same kind of situation next time.
I also, if I can offer, I also feel like there's a little bit of context here too, right? You know, if someone like is walking past me and, you know, they move to the other side of the street, you know, microaggressions and that, I don't think I'm going to chase them down, you know, to say, hey, why'd you know, move over there or something like that. I mean, I can tell you if somebody said something to my kids, I would just be all over that, right? Or if it was someone like a colleague that I work with, you need to have those conversations, right? I think it's kind of like, where will that ultimately, you know, make a difference? And I'm like, you know, I'm one of those people who's willing to just say, hey, you know, I think that's just really inappropriate. I mean, I had a conversation with a guy in a Hardee's one time about, you know, the pandemic, and you know, they said, oh, you know, no wonder it comes from China. It's dirty place, all that kind of. And I had to, you know, say something, you know, but I think there is a definitely standing up for the principle when it's appropriate and when it's warranted, because it's going to impact your life later on. But then there's going to be people out there who just make stupid comments, and, you know, engaging with them, while it might make me feel better, may not change their mind and may not change their behavior, right? And I think you kind of have to figure out when those situations are going to be, you know, applicable. Another thing, I think, you know, we don't want to always just assume that someone else is the problem. We have to kind of look at our own, you know, biases, and maybe we're having microaggressions too. You know, I don't want to say, you know, always turn the light on yourself and see if you're the only one at fault here, but, you know, perhaps, you know, we do something that sets the other person off, right? So to Elizabeth's point, you know, having these conversations in a open way sometimes dispels that, but also I think we have to also be mindful of our own, you know, perceptions and biases as well.
So I wanted to add that so like we talked a little bit about intention. So I have like a few experience personally that at the moment I didn't really recognize that it's kind of like that's the microaggression kind of situation. So I moved to US like 8 years ago, and I had last school interview, and there was like one professor when we were kind of talking, and he started like saying like, I want to hire you because like you're Japanese. I'm from Japan, so you're Japanese, and you're gonna be working hard, or like hard working. That kind of bias they have. At the time, I didn't know, so like I was like, okay, yeah, I will work hard. I didn't recognize, but now I know like, that's not the bias. Another thing is like some people, when we need to be friends or something, then they kind of be like samurai, like samurai or something. And I think that's not like appropriate interaction. At the moment, I didn't really like recognize. But yeah, now I feel like it was not some another example. Like, I was volunteering a Japanese class, and I was talking to a student. One student was asking me about anime or manga stuff. That I wasn't sure. Like I don't watch so many animes or like mangas. I didn't know, but like that was the only thing they were interested in. The student was. So I wasn't sure. I was confused. So that's the only thing you care about.
I think I have similar experience as they said. As an international grad student, and I'm from India, so I grew up in a homogeneous race. So once I came here, I experienced microaggressions, but I couldn't identify them. And those things, those like comments and things like that were coming from people whom I thought had only good intentions for me because they were my like superiors. And Asian culture, we are like brought up to respect our elders. So like identifying those microaggressions takes some time, and also to realize that it's not our job to make someone who is behaving like that like feel good about themselves, like saying that no, I understand it was not your intention, even if they're not being intentional in saying things like that. It's our like duty to make them realize that this is not right, this is not how you should behave. But it takes some time to understand that.
Yeah, that's a very important perspective, and I'm sorry to hear that you've had the experiences here.
I just have a small question here. So, do you have any statistics or positive stories to recount for where the voices against discrimination were heard of? Any case studies or something?
We want to respond to that. A question about, are there positive examples of people countering discrimination?
Yeah, that can also act as if someone can tell a personal story where they effectively combated such situation without hurting the person, or without creating a conflict, and also maintaining a very good relation, or maybe strengthening the relation with the whatever the conflict the people were involved in. Yeah, that would be quite helpful, I guess.
So it sounds like it's sort of a multi part question. If there's examples of positive responses to discrimination, so I think that could be something at a larger scale, like the Pinkford settlement for African American farmers who had been discriminated against by the USDA and denied loans. So I think there's examples of those sort of things at a structural level, but then also asking for examples at a personal level. And I think Elizabeth gave some sort of examples of conversations, but I think looking for more of those ideas of how have you ever successfully negotiated a microaggression, especially I think when it's coming from a superior, right? For the students, if you feel like your professors or your instructors are the ones who are giving you those microaggressions, or if it's your boss in an internship, how do you respond to that? So folks have responses to either of those types of questions.
We're sort of running out of time, so I want to be sort of cognizant of that. To answer your questions, if you want to know more about how to respond to microaggressions, Dr. Daryl Wing Sue wrote a really great book called Microinterventions. And we also have the microaggression microintervention toolkit. You need sort of references to that, just come and talk to me afterwards and I can actually share that information with you. But there are sort of strategies. There's the bystander strategies where you can talk about sort of active bystander trainings that occur as well. So there are ways in which to respond. So I just wanted to give that up, but I also wanted to make sure that Carla got in her last question to everybody. So really quickly before we go.
Yeah, thank you. If folks could just go around quickly and share with the students if you do have any advice about what you think would be important for them to be able to succeed in an ag or natural resource discipline.
For success, I mean, it's just a lot of hard work and just applying. I mean, for me, it's somebody's mentioned this at an academic conference one time, and excuse the way it was said, but it was like, I guess the way they said it's a crapshoot. You might get a job, you might not. You never know where you're going to end up. You just keep on applying. And for me, that's where my successes come in. I never expected to be working in the Forest Service, for example. And I was supposed to actually start a job in the intelligence agencies. But lo and behold, when I applied to a job in this agency, I got it. And so here I am. And I found out later on that I was third on that list. The other two people that were ahead of me decided not to take the jobs for a variety of different reasons. So, I mean, you never know, but just keep your, do all the good work you can, what you can to succeed, and apply, and you'll land your feet somewhere. That's been my mantra, is just kind of go with the path of least resistance. And if you're really passionate about what you're doing, you'll hopefully maybe end up in that area, getting to do cool things. And in terms of microaggressions, I mean, for me, I haven't had any. I've had my fair share, but I've felt more protected with my parents. Real quick, and I'll just kind of go over this, is where I've had to call people out and try to get more in depth of where the line of questioning was coming from when they were talking to my parents, by interceding and interjecting into the conversation and trying to help them out. But that was a positive thing, that people either they'll clarify their statement or they'll back away, and then you realize what their intentions were for a situation that happened to me. But other than that, that's what I've got for success. I don't know if that helps or not, though. Yeah.
For me, from my perspective, working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in natural resources and conservation, particularly for us, I think it's essential to start creating a support network as soon as you can. People that you respect and that you trust professionally. It doesn't matter if they're in the organization you're working for or outside, ideally both. Doesn't matter if they're part of the Asian and Pacific Islander and Desi community or not. Like, you just need people who have your back and who you can trust. Because honestly, it can be very difficult. There's, like I said, I've always been the only Asian American, not only at my workplace, but frequently in the community that I've lived in very rural communities. And for some people, you will represent a whole group of people. So everything you do, your work, your mannerisms, your attitude, everything is scrutinized and is used in some people's minds to represent a whole group of people. And sometimes those people have authority over you, and you have to work extra hard to get to a place that someone would work less hard. And I've had people tell me multiple times that I only have my job because I'm a diversity hire. I've had people refuse to shake my hand or look at me when I'm trying to explain a project to them. And it's tough. It makes you feel like you don't belong. It makes you feel like you're not qualified. So you really need that support system. And I think an extension of that is, to me, it's been important to pay attention to my mental health, to be able to keep a healthy mind and be resilient so that I can deal with these situations without letting it color how I see myself or how I feel. And it's been difficult, but having the support system helps. There's people who I can go to and I know that they're going to remind me, why I have this job and that I'm qualified, and that they're going to give me resources and help and advice to get out of these situations and to work through them. So I think it's essential to have that support system.
Yeah, I guess this is just more general. Thoughts on advancing and whatnot. First thing, channeling your parents, study hard. The second thing is just take your opportunities, right? When the doors open, sometimes you have to just kind of walk through them. I mean, I was a material scientist. I did work for NASA, and I walked through a different door, right? And it's taking me places that I really never would have thought of. I mean, I did not come out of high school saying, oh, I'm going to do this, right? And the third thing, to kind of echo what Elizabeth said a little bit, it's when you do find your place, I think it's really important to find mentors, because these are people who will help you in many different ways, whether it's helping you to advance, helping you to find a voice or a seat, and even, helping you to learn, right, how to be accountable. So I think it's really important when you do find your place that you find people who will be able to help you advance and be accountable to yourself.
My advice is actually very simple. Speak out. If you don't speak out, nobody knows what you're thinking. So you have to stand on your ground and let your voice be heard. So that's how I deal with things.
I guess I would underscore what Elizabeth and Eric have talked about in terms of establishing networks and being outgoing enough to tap into as many networks and assess them for how they may support you or not. And also this notion of mentors, I think, is very, very important. And these mentors can pop up in the strangest places, but as soon as you see someone who has your well-being in mind and is very willing to go to bat for you and to help you get to that point, embrace them. They're worth their weight in gold. And as I said, you may find them in the strangest of places. They may not be at your workplace. They may not even be. You may just run across them on the street one day and hold on to them. Get their phone number. Get in contact with them.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. I know that we get running low on time, so I don't want to hold people up, but I really appreciate all the panelists for their contributions today. I really appreciate all the students coming. As I said, all the panelists, either DT alums or faculty, so I'm sure would be glad to follow up if you have particular questions, we can get you in touch. And I know that Arvin posted a number of links from his agency, so we're glad to share those out. But thanks so much again, everybody. Oh, were there questions? Sorry, did we run out of questions?
No, I think there were just the comments that Arvin, yeah, Arvin, that will try to share on if you want it. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Really appreciate it. There are quite a few more events this week, so keep it. If you haven't done so already, I hope you can. Sign up for the listserv, and you'll get all the information about what's going on at the A Center this week and next week. Since it's last week, next week is the last week for APIDA Heritage Month, so. Please take advantage of what's going on. And then next month is Ramen for Reading Day, free ramen. And as well, sorry for those who can't attend or have free ramen, but that's what's going on here. As well as achievement ceremony. So there will be an achievement ceremony for those students who are graduating, or if you want to just share with the accomplishments of what's going on as well. But thank you for being here. Thank you again, Dr. Haas, for all of your hard work for putting this panel together. It was really incredible. Thank you for the panelists as well. Appreciate you very, very much. Bye. Bye.